Well, welcome back to another episode of the Always About People show. I'm your host, Chris Allen, and we have a special episode for you today. Over the past few episodes, we've been talking about what leading people really looks like. What does a people leader do? And how do I know if I am a people leader? But then I met a new friend. We'll call him a new friend because Brian has become a new friend. And over the past few weeks, we've had a number of conversations about the work that he's doing with leaders, really in this country, the United States, but also in Canada, and working with leaders around the globe. And one thing that stuck out to me was how he asks questions. And so we're going to get into this practical episode today. We've titled this episode, What Does Leading People Expose About Ourself? And while you may be questioning the grammar on this title, we did it very purposefully. Because instead of saying, what does leading people expose about people? What does leading people expose about yourself? What does leading people expose about ourselves? Instead of looking out there about other people, we hope that this show is practical as you would take a moment to look within yourself, that you would take the time to really think about how some of these questions that Brian is going to help us through would impact you and your leadership. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because in our description, we did say that really leadership exposes a number of things. It can affirm our strengths, but it can also accelerate our insecurities. And so I am so excited about our guest who's going to be joining us today. I think the one thing that I'll just share with you to whet your appetite just slightly is that Brian went from being a priest to an executive. I think that's all you need to know right now, because his perspective on both people and what they need, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs, their mental needs, physical, and all the rest, and then his work with executives is pretty fascinating. I'm excited to introduce you to Brian Bachand, and his name can look and I guess be pronounced a number of ways, but the proper pronunciation is Bachand. Would you help me welcome Brian to the show?
Hello,
Brian.
Chris.
Man, it is such an honor to have you on the show today. I know that I'm excited about the content that we're going to be discussing. Thank you for being here.
It's a real joy. And like you said in your intro, I'm so grateful for the introduction, that we connected, for the conversations we've had the past couple of weeks. And it's a joy to be here with you and your community today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, Brian, I think what I want to do is just give you some space to tell our guests, some of whom are your friends, but our guests, a little bit about yourself, your background. I think some people are probably questioning, how does this guy go from priest to now executive coach and numerous other roles, as you've helped raise money for nonprofits and led nonprofits and sit on boards? There's such a fun, diverse background for you. Would you help give our guests a little bit of context on your background?
Absolutely, sure. It's always an interesting starting point. So, I was a Catholic priest for 8 years, 4 years in a parish, and then 4 years I was the private secretary, or that would translate as like chief of staff to a cardinal from the Vatican. And then I freely decided to make a decision to leave and to evolve in a new way. And it really all goes back to one simple question. And it's a question I speak about all the time and with the leaders I work with. It simply is, what do I desire? When you ask that question, what is it that you desire? And you give the space to be open, honest, the truth will always come forward to help lead you forward of what is next. And that's exactly what happened in my life, and what happened and gave me the light, and gave me the courage, and gave me the ability to take the next step and to leave from one aspect of my life and to embrace another.
Well, again, what do you desire? I think is such a great question. And I think that what I want to help our guests understand is that you run your own coaching consulting practice called Evolution, because of the evolution that has gone through your own life. Mm-hmm. So I would love for you to just share maybe a little bit of that evolution for yourself.
Absolutely. So first of all, the company is named twice on purpose. Someone asked me, I don't know, last year, did you name it twice on purpose? I'm like, well, of course I did. And the first evolution is a nod to just our natural evolution as human beings. Who we are, where we are in the world, how a pandemic has helped every single human being evolve in a new way. But the second evolution is the one that we can freely choose to embrace, of how we want to evolve and be fully aligned with our strengths, with our purpose, and make that impact in the world. And I chose the name evolution because my life has been an evolution. And it's something that I think it's powerful to realize that no matter where we are in life, no matter what decisions we make, there's always another layer of that desire that's leading us forward. And oftentimes the things around us, society or people or stories we tell ourselves, hold us back. Oh, I became a lawyer, I spent all this money in law school, I'm a partner, now I can't leave. Well, that's not true. You can make a new decision to evolve forward.
Yeah.
And that's why the company is there, to be that light, to be that opportunity to help others evolve that want to go forward, because there's something inside that's drawing them forth.
That's awesome. Well, I know that in a lot of the work that we do at Always About People, we're constantly working with leaders as they evolve, as they change, because we know that in order for change to happen in an organization, change must happen in the lives of a leader. And it's that deep change that creates the ability for me to work with people, for me to understand people, for me to utilize my strengths, but also understand my insecurities. And in our conversations over the past few weeks, Brian, we've talked about how really it's questions that drive leaders to evolve. And as we've been just talking about the questions we ask different people, one of the things that you brought up is, hey, I'm constantly asking questions of leaders. I would love to jump straight in to okay, where do you start with leaders when you get involved and engaged in a leader's life? Where do you typically start with them? You started with one question, which was, what do you desire? Is that your typical starting place?
That can definitely be one of the key starting places. But I think one of the other aspects is often asking them, what are they seeking clarity on? When they engage with me, there's a reason. One of my programs is called Enlightenment Evolution. And it's about being enlightened about something they want to evolve in. So right away, it's that first, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I'm seeking clarity on? What is it that may be blocked? Or what is it that's been brought to my attention and I'm fearful on, and I don't know how to deal with something? So for many, executives and individuals that I work with, it can be a sense that they're in a new leadership position. And the higher that you grow in your career and the more responsibility you have, not only is your expertise highlighted and strengthened, but oftentimes our vulnerable aspects are also triggered at a high level. And that is where they will often say, oh, I have to work with this board member that's so challenging. And it's really not about the board member or about a colleague or your new boss. It's something deeper inside that they're carrying that is now getting triggered in a new way. And it's an opportunity to look at it and to really see the why and how to move forward with clarity and with action.
All right. So the title of this episode, what does leading people expose about ourself, myself? And we've talked about strengths. We've talked about insecurities. When a leader becomes a new leader, whether they're a leader of a new organization, or maybe they've moved from an individual contributor and into a leadership role, they're going to be wrestling with all kinds of insecurities in that moment. And so it's, hey, what do you desire? But what's an area that you'd like to establish clarity in? I'd just be interested in knowing, what are some of the common themes that you hear or see from new leaders, whether they're new to a new organization or new in their leadership? What are some common themes?
So, one of the biggest themes that comes across, especially for someone that is in a significant leadership role for the first time, whether they're a new CEO or they're new in leading a team, is this desire to really show impact and to connect. And I'll give an example just to illustrate this. So there was one individual I worked with who was a new CEO of a healthcare facility, and incredible human being, incredible background, dynamic personality. But shared with me one time, they had to do these town halls. This is when everybody was meeting. This is pre, COVID, and this individual said, Brian, I'm standing up there and I'm supposed to be rah, rah, like we're amazing and thank everyone. Underneath my coat, I'm like a ball of sweat. I don't feel I'm connecting. I feel disjointed. And I think, that is an issue that so many people feel that that's what their predecessors have done, or that's what's expected. And there's all this buzz talk right now about, being an authentic leader, authenticity. And that's true. We all want to be authentic. But being authentic is working out of our natural gifts of who we are and elevating that. So what we did is we came up with an opportunity that, this individual would, after events in the evening, would stop by the hospital and walk the floors as the CEO, speaking to the cleaning person, to stopping by the nurses station, stopping in to see patients. And that built such community, trust, exposure that fit in naturally with this individual's personality, that when COVID hit, they had the trust, they had the community built around them to lead, more than just doing their town hall of rah-rah. They built that naturally through their own strengths. So sometimes it's breaking down what we think we should do and be truly authentic in where you need to be.
So, Brian, in that example, how did that leader, either through questions or kind of self-assessment, how did that leader come to the conclusion that, gosh, my natural self, my true self, my authentic self is to go build relationships with people of all levels in this hospital? How did you get there?
So it was really simply by asking, okay, so a town hall is probably something you're going to have to do. So we'll come back to that. So let's park that. I said, but tell me, where do you enjoy connecting with people? And it just naturally came out and said, I love when I walk down a hospital floor and I stop at the nurse's station and I get to ask what's going on. Or I can see a patient that maybe has a visitor and you could just tell that they're kind of having a hard day, to stop to say hello. So what came out of that was a sense of realizing that they enjoyed conversation and connecting. And it was going to be more in smaller groups that was going to build that. And that's how we came up with the plan of every week, how many times a week, where it would be almost in their schedule when they were going to do that. And it came out of asking that question. And as soon as I asked the question, this individual started smiling about why they loved. And they started telling me all these stories of when meeting this person and that person. And I said, that's your answer. That's it.
Yeah. Brian, that made me think of a couple of different examples. And I wanted to just pause for a second to let all of our guests know, if you have a question or a comment, or maybe it's a question on this conversation, please send it in to us. We can see these live and would love to address some of the real practical things that you're asking about. But a couple things went through my mind when you were sharing that example. I've worked with a handful of executives who will say something like, I'm exhausted, or I never thought it would get to this point, or please don't tell me it will look like this forever. And that begins sort of this conversation into, What are the things in your life that are draining you
Mm,
versus what are the things that are really providing a level of excitement in your life,
mhm,
that are energizing? And oftentimes, what happens is the same thing that happened with that executive you were just talking about. They realize that they're spending more time in activities that drain them and not those things that truly energize them or are authentic to themselves. And so, one example would be, I feel like I'm spending time dealing with all these people problems,
mm,
but what I really want to do is go find us new business.
mhm,
And so you realize that the actual business was built on them doing business development, and now they've moved away from it.
mhm,
How do we get them back?
mhm.
So anyway, I think that those are powerful questions. Let's circle back to more questions. So you're helping somebody understand, okay, what is it you desire? What is it you'd like to gain some clarity on?
Mhm,
With this one example, it was, hey, what do you want to spend more time doing?
mhm.
What are some other questions that you're working through with leaders?
Yeah. So before we jump into that, I just want to say, and it ties into the name of your company, always about people. First of all, I love that name.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that leaders, now more than ever because of the pandemic, it has to always be about people.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the biggest questions that I will come up is how are you engaging your people? That's number one. And I think that has been one of the biggest issues that came up is, especially when everything went online and now things are back, to the office or a hybrid, is how are you engaging your people? How are you being present to your people?
Hmm.
And that is a really big question. That is something that's really, really important that comes up. The second biggest question that comes up a little bit right now is also dealing with a sense of, their purpose of in the work. And what I mean by that, purpose is such a broad term, but what I mean by that a little bit deeper is I'm finding many of the leaders that I work with are very high achievers. And I'm pretty agnostic in terms of industries that I work with. It can be from asset management to healthcare to finance to not for profits. It doesn't matter. But these are individuals that are really, really driven in their field, but they also have this desire to make impact with their people.
Hmm.
And they're trying to really ask their questions. How can I do that? How can we go deeper in being of service as a team and our clients? And that is something that I'm finding many leaders are really trying to really look at and to see how they can integrate that into their teams for themselves and for those that they serve.
All right. So I'm gonna send one back to you
Sure.
because I feel like people say that and it might become a little bit of a buzzword.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there are all kinds of things that keep people from actually being present and engaging with their people,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be insecurities or beliefs about leadership. Um, we'll just start there. When you ask somebody, how are you engaging your people? What are some of the typical responses?
There's always the typical ones, right? There's always this, we have your planned meetings and you have maybe an offsite and some of the different things. Okay, great. And I certainly understand that, many to keep adding on is not always easy. The challenge I put before the leaders is how can you redefine what you already have to engage with your people? And so one of the things that we started to do is, the word gratitude. Gratitude is such a foundation. And this one pharmaceutical leader that I worked with actually started changing their biweekly meeting with their team instead of just going through their projects and different things, is really stating what is one thing they're grateful for
Hmm.
that day personally, whatever they wish to share, whatever level, but second, about their work that day and how they're making an impact. And that small shift and being part of that changed the dynamic of the team because people started to share a little bit more. The energy went up. There was more of an appreciation of the work that they were doing and how they were making impact. And it actually led to more creative conversation as well, especially the gratitude about something that they're enjoying in their work. Because people followed up with, wow, that's amazing. Tell me more. I didn't know about that story or that took place. So there's ways to integrate what's already existing. And that's one of the questions I often will say is, well, you don't have to keep adding on. That's one of the biggest things we feel. Oh, we have to do another thing, another thing. No, take what you have and redefine it.
I love that. That's such a helpful practical tip. So in a world of us sort of meetings that happen over and over and over again, how do we take an existing schedule and repurpose it, redefine it? I love that. I love that. Brian, one of the companies that I've worked with in the past started every meeting by each person saying something they were grateful about somebody else on the team. And I thought, like, in addition to what am I grateful for? What am I grateful for in my work? What am I grateful for in the people that I work with? And I think that's just such a cool thing. Hey, we just have a question that came in from Mark. As a leader, how do you learn to accept that your people or customers won't always do what's in their own best interest, even when it seems clear and obvious? How do you learn to accept that they won't always do what's in their own best interest, even when it seems clear and obvious? This is really interesting because, Brian, I'm assuming that you get involved in people's lives where you have to point out, hey, listen, that thing you're doing may not be in your best interest. How do you approach that?
Yeah. So, I have to say one of the things that, I've been described as I think working in New York City for so many years, I have a very direct style, but I think what made it different is I'm also compassionate in how I address it. And I think that's something that's really, really important because we grow by sometimes having things pointed out to us, but the way it's pointed out is really, really important. So, for example, one leader that I was working with was a CEO that was explaining to me they were taking on all this work from someone on their senior leadership team that wasn't doing the work and was spending hours engaged with it. And, because they wanted to prove that they were going to, make success that year and meet all their numbers. And I said, that's not the best use of your time. Why are you spending that time and enabling that person? And it led to a deeper conversation of sometimes they've done that in relationships as well, and sometimes you have to just be able to point things out and ask another question to let them talk about it. And I find my role is like a lighthouse, being born and raised in Boston along the New England coast, it's very rocky. I find it's being that lighthouse to shine down, the rocks and what's happening. They're the ones navigating the sails and navigating the coast. But it's important to shine the light so they don't crash or they don't cause more pain. And I find leaders respond well when it's direct, when it's done with the right tone, and then they can start to see the why of why they took that action.
Yeah. I think that's great. I love the analogy as well. I think the one thought that triggered for me is, all right, so you have a leader who may or may not be doing things in their own best interest. The way Mark asked that question was, how do you learn to accept? And I think what I would just say is, it might not be a matter of accepting. It's a matter of asking them questions so that they can come to the realization themselves. Would you agree with that, Brian?
I certainly would. I mean, I certainly think, everyone has blind spots, right? And there's no perfect leader, there's no perfect boss. And I think it's a sense of sometimes just helping them to be enlightened, to maybe ask the right question. And there's different ways to do that and the different dynamics, but I agree with you completely. That's a very fair and positive approach to how to deal with that.
Yeah. So we'll get to Kathy's question in just a second, but I think that part of what I was thinking about is if somebody can't see it in themselves, you said earlier, how do I ask them the right questions so that they can come to maybe a conclusion themselves? And really, we want to help somebody understand, like that lighthouse, we want to reveal the areas where, gosh, this may be an insecurity. There may be something else here. How do we bring clarity to this? And really what we're doing is we're getting to below those behaviors, whatever the behaviors may be, into either belief systems, attitudes, habits, mentalities, maybe it's emotions or feelings. But I do have a quick question for you. Do you think this buzzword around empathy is hurting us? And maybe I'll add a little bit more color to this. I think people have defined empathy the way they want to. And we have leaders who are saying, so I'm just supposed to be empathetic towards everyone. And so empathy means I have to understand, I have to acknowledge, and I don't ever really get to hold anyone accountable. I don't get to call anybody out. Could you just help us with maybe a definition of what empathy means to you and how you're working with leaders to understand empathy versus accountability? Maybe that's the way to say it.
Yeah, sure. So two things. First of all, whenever there's quote buzzwords, even like I said earlier, whether it's empathy or purpose or authenticity, there's a reason why those words are really popular, because it's signaling an evolution, that's taking place. There's a sense that, wow, people want to have more purpose in their work or how they're doing. There's a sense that people want to have more empathy, they haven't been listened to. So that's a positive. But like anything, it can get overused sometimes, or maybe it loses some of the clarity, but that's a positive because it's signaling something greater that's evolving. But number two, empathy is not about saying, oh, everything's okay. Like this is your job. And, let's say someone's not showing up to work or they're not being responsible and they're not doing things. Well, there's accountability for there, and they have to be accountable. Empathy for me means, number one, listening. To be an empathetic leader means to first listen. Listen with an openness, not to interrupt, not to get the answer that you need to hear, but simply to ask, gee, we really been noticing, Chris, that, you haven't been, showing up, to the meetings. There's been a lot of excuses. Some deliverables haven't come in. We're concerned because we need to have, deliverables here. But is there something else that we might be able to help you with? Is there something else going on? And really mean that, to listen what's said and not said. And that is being something that is important. And that's why there's so many people that are just so frustrated, with organizations of saying, I was never heard. I was never respected. I had to hide that I had a mental health issue or a sick parent. And I was trying to balance that. Being an empathetic leader to me means, number one, listening, not to interrupt, and listening to truly hear what is being said before you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That actually leads us into Kathy's question, which was, should we always look for patterns? And I'm going to read into this a little bit. I think the conversation before in understanding ourselves, should we look for patterns in ourselves? How do you get leaders to, I guess, acknowledge and be aware of their own patterns? How do you get there?
Well, first of all, Kathy, that's a great question. And I feel we could go in a lot of directions with that, but I'll just kind of take it from what you said too, Chris, is, I think it's important that the only way we can look at patterns is if we create the space to do some of that inner work, especially as a leader. It's that simple, because we can create habits and patterns that we're not even aware of. Some are positive, some might be negative. So it's a sense of looking at the patterns and to pause. So I think, one of the things that I do is, I created a method called the START method that I do with teams and with leaders. It's a reflective practice. And it's a way to review how you are living out your schedule at work, where you're placing your energy, where you are in your relationships, what do you need to surrender? And by taking that time, I do it every single month, personally, the 11th of every month. And that is just a way to review and to see, is there a pattern or a behavior that I've kind of developed that, wow, I'm spending too much time, doing this, or I need to move away. You can only do it when you have the space to look at that. And I think it's important that as organizations evolve, that there are more opportunities to be reflective, to see what patterns, positive or challenge, that need to be looked at.
Brian, you're not going to believe this, but we're already 30 minutes into this conversation. And what that means is that we need to do a follow-up. But for our viewers, we said that we want this show to be highly practical. We want you to leave as a leader with some practical steps that you can take into your work today. And as I listened to the conversation, I'm here taking notes as fast as I can. But I think where you ended is maybe the 30,000 foot view, which is in order to really understand what's going on within myself. What our title was, what does leading people expose about ourself? In order for me to understand what's going on in myself, I need to do the inner work. And that inner work is a process of understanding, hey, what do I desire? What impact do I want to have? How can I connect deeper with people? How can I be grateful for so many of these things around me? What does empathy look like? And then going through that reflective exercise that you mentioned, understanding, what do I need to surrender? Where is my time spent? What do I need to get rid of? What do I need to add? And I think that we said from the beginning of this conversation that leadership can affirm strengths, but it can also accelerate our insecurities. And I just know that from our conversations over the past few weeks, one of the things that we talked about was, even in myself, my desire to perform, my desire to win, to compete. And your questions going back in my own life to a place where even in my soccer career, that desire to not sit on the bench, that feeling, because what you asked me was, where do you feel that? Where have you felt that before? And so, Brian, I think what I want to do right now is just say thank you, but also say we need to do this again, because we've barely scratched the surface. And I'm going to just pause there and let you finish this thing. How would you, again, not necessarily tie a bow on this conversation because we've only just begun, but what would you tell a few leaders today that could help them this week from this conversation?
Well, first of all, I welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation again. It's great. It's really, really wonderful. So two things, and I'm a practical person, because you can live in theory all you want, but you're not going to get anywhere. So you have to put things in action. If you're a leader right now and you're just like, this week it's already Tuesday and it's just like, I just want it to be Friday because it's just crazy, after this show or whenever you're watching this, take the simplest action, and this will elevate you and your energy. Select someone on your team, select a colleague, select a client, select someone that might be a little bit of a challenge for you. And reach out to them via email or stop by, their office and just say, I just want to say, I just really appreciate, a couple of weeks ago, I saw you did this extra work on this presentation. It really made an impact. I just really appreciate the presence that you had the other day at a meeting. and it really brought clarity. What does that do? It elevates you, but it also engages them. So long as it's coming from a place of sincerity, that's powerful. That's being an incredible leader, and it changes your energy immediately. And they'll never forget that. It's that simple. Number two, if you're in a moment of just like, wow, I'm in this new role, and you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling blocked, just say, you don't have to figure it out. You can just simply say, what do I desire to now take action on? What do I desire to get clarity? Maybe it's meeting with someone outside of your office. Maybe it's engaging with someone. Maybe it's just stepping away from the situation, trying to control it. But just ask yourself that question and give yourself permission just to be open without trying to control or come to a solution. That can truly, truly ease a tension that can be building in your mind.
That's awesome. Well, I don't need to recap that because you just finished it. What I will just say to our viewers today is this conversation needs a part 2, maybe part 3, part 4. Either way, Brian has already said he's in. So, Brian, I just want to say thank you. I am grateful for you, for your voice, for your wisdom today, as you've helped leaders think through, hey, where can I start? What are some things that I can ask myself? What are some patterns and some things that I can discover about myself? Because this leadership thing, it's exposed some stuff. It's exposed both the good things and some things that I'm not quite sure how to deal with. And I think as leaders, if we can wrestle through that, it makes us more effective to lead people. So this whole show, Always About People show, is about how we lead and influence people in our daily lives. Brian, you've added to our understanding and our knowledge and our wisdom today. You've also given us some practical ways that we can become better leaders. And I just want to say thank you to you.
Well, thank you.
For those of you who watch this show every week, thank you for joining us. Again, you can see us live on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Facebook. And we appreciate you joining us for these different topics every week. We'll see you next episode for another amazing topic. Thanks for joining us.